we have to talk about this awful attack that happened just less than 2 days ago now, and as you've said in a tweet, less than 2 blocks from here.
Right.
And I thought you put it particularly well, that it's a challenge to, as we remember the victims, we try to act normal in abnormal times. How does a leader do that, where you have to recognize the horrific acts that have happened and how it affects your employees as well, but at the same time, continue with your business?
You know, I hate to say it, but there's no real elaboration you can do. You have no choice but to go forward. You can't submit to it. It wouldn't make sense on either level. You wouldn't want to accede to what the, quote, terrorists would like you to do. And at the same time, life does go on. But there's an appropriate time to mourn and express regret and to show some appreciation for what we have. But it's a terrible situation. But it is abnormal times. You didn't think that in New York City, in this country, you had to be susceptible to that kind of random violence. And the very nature of the randomness is what makes it terrifying, because it's not as if you can control it. You can't say, I will not go here, I will not go there. So what you really have to do is say, statistically, this is not going to affect me. I'm not going to let it have an outsized impact on my life. Although if you're involved in it, of course, it's 100% for you.
I do want to talk about this forum that we're here for, the Sustainable Finance Innovation Forum. My understanding of what the thrust of this is, particularly in the environmental area, is to do well and to do good at the same time. Is that possible? Is that the right way to go at it? Or might we be better off to really make money for the sake of making money and then use that money for good purposes?
Oh my goodness. I would say that that in this particular case, there's of course a lot of challenges with respect to the environment, but working on sustainable, environmentally sensitive projects is certainly good business, and it's very commercial. I mean, people want to live healthy lives. Once you have achieved your level of wealth where you're not living on subsistence, you'd like to live, you'd like your children to live and grow up healthy and grow up strong. You look what's going on in China now, where they're sacrificing very self-consciously a lot of growth in return for living better lives. Nobody wants to make incremental money and have unhealthy children. And beyond that, some of the technologies that are driving people just as a matter of economics. The United States, without particularly expending a lot of control or law or regulation, is going to, maybe in some ways inadvertently, complying with some of the more broader strictures of how to control the environment, simply because the technologies are more effective, more efficient, cheaper. There's a movement away from coal that was occurring anyway. It certainly didn't happen by regulation. It happened just by economics towards natural gas. Wind power in the state of Texas is going and becoming a higher and higher percentage, because it's not because it's sustainable, but because it's more effective and it's more cheaper, and by the way, it's sustainable.
So if we're moving in that direction anyway, why can't the markets just take care of it? For example, LNG and liquid natural gas, and natural gas generally, the price has gotten so low that certainly is curtailing coal. So would the markets just take care of this on their own?
Actually, in a lot of ways, the markets are taking care of it. So in other words, the move towards natural gas, again, which is a fossil fuel, so it may not be the 100% of the dream of environmentalists who want to move totally away from fossil fuel, but natural gas is much less damaging to the environment than oil is, and so the market is moving us there just by the by the good fortune. We wouldn't have known this necessarily half a generation ago, but natural gas in so much abundance is one of the reasons why North America is going to be, is effectively energy sufficient. We have a lot of it, and it's cheap to get out of the ground. The technologies are making it so, and so people who have invested in those technologies have made a lot of money and are doing effectively well for themselves and doing some social good, as it turns out. And that's being repeated now. That's not to say that other avenues and other aspects don't need a bit of a subsidy and a bit of a push to get them going, so they can reach a scale where the science can be proved so they can be sustainable in the long run. Certainly some of the electrification of the automobile industry, that's getting some subsidies. It shouldn't last forever, but certainly it was necessary to get these technologies launched. I don't think you could sell a competitive fully battery-powered car today without some of the subsidies, but at some point those subsidies will have to go away.
We're just a short time away from hearing from the president who his next nominee will be for Fed chair. It's widely reported it's going to be Jerome Powell. As you look at someone like Jay Powell, we look at his background, what his experience is. He's been on the Fed for some time. He comes really out of private equity, Carlyle, and then originally Dillon Reed.
Well, he was also in the Treasury, and he had a lot of commitment to public service as well.
As far as you're concerned, as you look at it, is he prepared to deal with a crisis? It's one thing to manage the Fed when it's sort of humming along, but we've had to rely upon Fed chairs from time to time to really deal with a substantial downturn. Is there anything in Jay Powell's background that prepares him for that?
Oh, I think so too. First of all, nobody is very well prepared for the most critical moment that they would ever have in anyone's career. I know when you train for the marathon, you run 5 miles, 10 miles, maybe you do one 20-mile run, but you don't run 26 miles every day to train for the marathon. That's where you want to peak. So, I mean, his background is a terrific background. Again, a lot of government service in the Fed, service in the private sector. I think he's a very, very credible candidate. There were other credible candidates as well, but I am not one bit disappointed if it turns out to be Jay Powell.
And you're not concerned about his lack of a PhD. There's a lot of talk about whether you need a PhD, particularly as we're in really unprecedented times. When we have a huge balance sheet we're unwinding, there are a lot of things going on with central banks we haven't seen before.
I don't know what his dissertation would have been on, but the failure to complete that dissertation, I don't think that's, sometimes I feel that people with PhDs, and believe me, I'm not anti-intellectual. I have a law degree. My kids are went to graduate school. I'm not against people who have PhDs, but sometimes I wish people who only had PhDs had a little bit more life and professional and business experience. I think Jay's background, he also has a law degree, and he has as broad a background in preparation for this as anybody has in the last several decades. And by the way, we have been really, this country has been blessed. The last couple of Fed chair people who got us through the crisis and its aftermath had done a pretty good job. If you'd gone back 10 years ago and had prophesied where we would be, where the economy would be today, people were projecting that we were nearly at the tipping point of going into a great recession. And you know something, there were hard times, but it didn't quite get that deep, and it didn't get quite that severe. And it wasn't fiscal policy that got us through most of that. It was the monetary policy and the extraordinary actions, some of which were invented by the people who occupied that chair.
As you look forward to perhaps a Jay Powell regime at the Federal Reserve, and by the way, there are going to be several other new members of the Fed, what does Goldman Sachs, what do financial markets need from the Federal Reserve over the next few years?
Well, the Federal Reserve has to, again, extract us from the extraordinary measures that were taken, which I know some people are quite obsessed about that. I think that that's going to occur, and I don't think that's so dangerous. We also have to prepare for a cycle where rates rise. I mean, for a very long time, interest rates have been very low. And by the way, that hasn't been obnoxious to the economy. Inflation has been very low. But I suppose that money around the world won't continue to be a free good, and it'll be properly allocated. And while it's being, properly, priced, so it can be properly allocated. And while that's occurring, we have to sort of remove that extra stimulus, reduce the balance sheet, raise rates, and the big test is going to be to do that in a way that it doesn't shock us into a bad position. I mean, this is a little bit like moving a kind of unstable, dangerous chemical, and you want to treat it very, very carefully. Everybody knows it has to be done. Everybody's doing. Transparency, again, is part of the implementation remedy to make sure everybody knows what's happening, so it's projected, so there's no sudden, quick, jerky move with respect to it. But it's going to take a deft touch to do this, all the while bracing for the fact that there may be some bubbles that pop up in places. Money has been cheap for a long time. Maybe it's gone into some places it shouldn't have.
And at the same time, as we're reducing that stimulus from the central bank in monetary policy, we have a president and a Republican portion of Congress, at least, who seems really bent on increasing fiscal stimulus. We have just today the details of the Republican tax plan. What does a good tax reform package look like, and what does a bad one look like?
I haven't seen, I've been involved in this conference, so I haven't seen what's come out. I know going in, I know there are going to be stimulative elements to it, which I think is a little bit, I can't see that this is the moment when you'd want the most fiscal stimulus in the market, when we're kind of mostly at full employment, when GDP last registered at 3%. This one, I don't know, this is the moment that you provide the biggest stimulus. But a lot of people, the president, thinks that the economy can grow really fast. And I'm not taking the other side of that. I think the economy can grow faster because I know there are things out there that are impeding the growth of the family. So maybe we could get higher than 3%. Or, listen, if we sat at 3% and this just wasn't a momentary, that would be fine. So anyway, a good plan would be something that, look, the freest kind of stimulus you could provide for the economy is confidence and peeling away redundant or bad regulation, to be frank. Obviously, if you peel away all regulation, that'd be no good. You need a lot of it, but you don't need redundant regulation, and you don't need regulation where the cost benefit is out of whack, where it restricts activity and in the name of safety really takes away a lot of growth potential of the extra safety, takes away a lot of the growth potential of the economy. And doing that kind of adjustment is kind of free, because it's not like you're spending a lot of money to achieve it and you're not widening the deficit to achieve it. Same thing with confidence and business confidence. So those are the things that you really want to see. On the actual expenditure of money or taking in less taxes, some more of it we can afford to have, but not so much of it that we make inflation inevitable down the road.
You've tweeted about various subjects, actually. It's interesting, your tweet experience. But one of the things you tweeted about was Bitcoin, that you were still thinking about a month ago now. We now have the LME saying that they're actually, CME, sorry, actually saying they're going to start trading in futures on
Bitcoins are a little too tangible for the London Metals Exchange.
Yeah, that's right, exactly.
Yes.
So, so the CME is going to have futures with Bitcoin. Are you still thinking about it? And if Goldman customers, your customers, come to you and say, we really want to have this as part of our portfolio, do you have any choice but to get involved in Bitcoin?
Look, I have a level of discomfort with it, as I have a level of discomfort with anything that's new. But I've learned over the years that there's a lot of things that work out pretty well that I don't love. I remember when they first came out with cell phones, I'm thinking, why would anybody want this thing? It lasts, battery lasts about 10 minutes. It weighs a ton. You have to have it on your back. And there's phone machines every 15 feet. Why would anyone want this? Guess what? I missed that one. And here, I read a lot of history, and I know once upon a time, a coin was worth $5 if it had $5 worth of gold with it. And then a piece of paper was worth $5, but only if it was backed by gold in the treasury, or silver in the silver certificate. And even then, people were suspicious. Now we have paper that's only backed by fiat. The government says, I think that's what it's worth. Maybe in the new world, something gets backed by consensus. Right. Instead of a government fiat, maybe it's a consensual arrangement by people that agree that it's worth something, kind of like what social media does. It's not my natural state of comfort. But if you told me that, if we went into the future and Bitcoins were successful, I would be able to explain how it's a natural evolution from hard money. By the way, why is gold worth anything more than the jewelry value in gold? That's kind of a consensus that people have, because no government says, I'm going to pay you $1,300 an ounce from gold. It just is that. If somebody, why is it worth that? You can't eat it. Why is it worth that? Because it's been like that for a long time. And so maybe 200 years from now, even someone like me might be comfortable with it. But right now, I tell you, I don't have an investment in it, but I'm not willing to poo-poo it, and that's why I say I'm open to it.
So finally, the president's about to go on a big trip to Asia. And I understand just today, I've learned that, in fact, you're going to be joining him on that trip. What is your agenda in that? Or should we expect for some opening of China, particularly, to financial services?
We have a ton of activity in China. We've had a ton of activity in a long time. We were very much involved in the going public of most of the large banks, and we've been a big investor in China for a long time, and we have helped American companies do business into China, and Chinese companies do business in the United States, and part of that trade that we find so virtuous, not only just for the dual economies, but frankly for the integration and understanding between us, and I think it's positive, and so I'll be very proud to be part of that mission.
But do you have an agenda as you go over?
Let me tell you, there's very few places that I don't have an agenda.
I'm sure that's true. Okay, it's Lloyd Blankfein. He is chairman and CEO of Goldman Sachs. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you very much, David.